We're live. Good morning and warm greetings to all. The Institute for Human Development, in partnership with the International Labour Organization, has prepared the India Employment Report 2024 Youth Employment, Education and Skills. I am honored to welcome you all to the national launch of the India Employment Report 2024, being organized by IHD and ILO. I am Priyanka Tyagi, the Chief Executive Officer of Institute for Human Development, New Delhi. This report is the third in the series of regular publications by the Institute for Human Development on labor and employment issues. It is hoped that this report will serve as a timely and constructive input for policymakers, social partners, civil society, and other researchers over the coming years. As you may be aware, IHD is celebrating 25 years of its founding this year. The Silver Jubilee celebrations commenced on 25th January 2023. This publication and the event are a part of several lectures, conferences, and activities of the year-long IHD Silver Jubilee celebrations to be concluded on 31st March 2024 in Hyderabad, wherein the Southern Region launch of the report will be held. This report, the publication of this report, is indeed a milestone which has been achieved in our Silver Jubilee year. We have a very eminent group of panelists and resource persons, dignitaries who have come here today. The Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, Dr. V. Anantha Nageshwaran, kindly consented to launch this report. A multifaceted personality, Dr. Nageshwaran has worked as a writer, author, and teacher. He has taught at several business schools and institutes of management in India, in Singapore, and has published extensively. It is my honor, sir, to invite you to kindly grace the dais. Request you to kindly grace the dais, sir. The launch of the report will be followed by a panel discussion, which will be chaired by Professor Deepak Nayyar. He's the chairman of IHD, Professor Emeritus, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and former Vice Chancellor of University of Delhi. Request you, sir, to kindly grace the dais. Dr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, the former Deputy Chairman of Planning Commission, Government of India, has not been able to make it here today. We heard last night that he has encountered a knee injury, and due to some medical reasons, he'll not be able to join us. However, he has sent us good wishes. I now invite Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, the Editorial Director of Business Standard, to please grace the dais. Ms. Sunita Sanghi, former Principal Advisor, Ministry of Skill and Entrepreneurship, Government of India. Ma'am, kindly come on the dais. Dr. Rana Hassan, Regional Lead Economist, South Asia Asian Development Bank. Kindly join us on the dais, sir. This event is being co-hosted with the ILO. I invite Mr. Satoshi Sasaki, the Deputy Director of ILO Decent Work Team for South Asian Country Office for India, to please come on the dais. Professor Ken Sharma, Professor and Director of the Institute for Human Development, sir, kindly join the dais. The lead authors of the report, along with Professor Ken Sharma, I invite Professor Ravi Srivastava, Professor and Director, Center for Employment Studies, Institute for Human Development, New Delhi, to please come on the dais. And finally, Dr. Sher Singh Verick, Head Employment Strategies Unit, Employment, Labor Markets, and Youth Branch, International Labour Organization, ILO Geneva, to please come on the dais. So we do have a very formidable, lineup of people who are sitting here. So we welcome them all, and it calls for a big round of applause. They've all agreed to join us here from their busy schedules. Thank you very much. I now invite Professor Ken Sharma, Professor and Director of the Institute for Human Development, for his welcome and opening address.
Dr. Nageshwaran, Professor Deepak Nayyar, Dr. Sunita Sanghi, Mr. Bhattacharya, Mr. Satoshi Sasaki, Dr. Rana Hassan, my colleague Ravi Srivastava, Dr. Sher Verick, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of IHD, I accord warm welcome to all of you for being here on the occasion of the launch of the India Employment Report 2024, Youth Employment, Education and Skills. As my colleague Priyanka said, that this report has been prepared in partnership with ILO. I was expecting that not so many people will be turned up because of Holi. Half of Delhi is closed today also. And in some parts of Delhi, in different regions, Holi is being celebrated today also. And I'm very happy that all of you have been able to join this occasion. This report is the third in this series of regular publications of ISD on labor and employment issues. The first report, India Labor and Employment Report 2014, Indian workers in the era of globalization, provided a comprehensive view of employment and labor market situation in the wake of globalization of the Indian economy. We had thought that at that time that every 2 years, we will publish this report with a thematic focus. The first report was a general one. Accordingly, in 2016, we brought out, and which has been brought out by the Oxford University Press, this India Employment Report 2016, Challenges and the Imperative of Manufacturing-Led Growth, which provided the evolving characteristics of the employment challenges confronting the economy and very strongly argued for pursuing a manufacturing-led growth for overcoming the employment challenge. It was lead author was its late Professor Ajit Ghosh, an honorary professor at IHD. We had, as I said, we wanted to publish every 2 years due to COVID, due to our compulsions, because of ISD being nature of being a project-based institution, we could not do it. And also 3 years were lost, COVID. But finally, this third report has come, in which ILO has closely collaborated, worked rather in the team. Very happy, my friends Share Verik from Geneva is here. We hope that this is a thematic focus on education, youth employment and skills. This report is based on latest data we have used up to 2023, and also earlier NSS data, ASI, Reserve Bank claim data, whatever was available, we have used. We believe that, and strongly believe that, this PNFS data is comparable with the earlier NSS data. And accordingly, we have, since 2020, the around 20 years, 2 decades, 2000, roughly 23 years, the evolution of labor market and evolving from that labor market challenges we have traced. There is a team which has worked very hard on this report from ISD, my colleague Ravi here. From ISD, the team is Dr. G.C. Manna, a former CSO, Director General, NSS Director General, who is a professor in ISD, is there. Sipra Tandon, Sipra Nigam, Tanuka Endo, Diksha Tyal, Balwant Singh Mehta, Siddharth Dhote, all are here. And from ILO, Share Verik, and Felix from ILO Bangkok, they worked. So this was a team. The team coordinated, or whatever you come, led by Ravi, Sher, and me. But really, it is a teamwork. we organized a inception workshop, rather 3 hours, 4 hours, very intensive workshops in which a number of experts from different parts of the country participated. Several rounds of in-house discussion took place. Reviewers gave a round of 2-3 rounds of comments. Then it was discussed, report was discussed in the Itanagar IS at the occasion of ISLE conference, in which a large number of people participated. Then the IASI conference in Hyderabad. Several times we updated the report. When we produced the draft, 2021-22 data had come. And we had produced only 2021 data. So it was revised. Now 22-23 data. So some chapters have been revised. We have written a postscript. So now this report is updated as per the latest data. This report, after this release, will be open access, available on the website of ILO, ISD. We have just printed a few copies for release here, digital print, which looks quite bulky, but when offset print, it is printed, and there are formatting issues also. But otherwise also, if we exclude the appendix table and references, it is only around 200 pages. But our dilemma was that it is both a policy report and analytical report. And we could not check our temptation to, while producing an analytical report, that we should give all the facts, all the analysis. Though we have tried to be economical. Hope that this report will be of use for policy making and other stakeholders, particularly those involved on youth employment, education, and skills. There were also reviewers, including Dr. Manna, Sher, Felix, Jerry Rogers, and late Dr. Ajit Ghosh, who died, who worked in ILO for a long time, who worked in ISD for more than 10 years, and during the preparation of the report, he died. We have dedicated the report to his memory. And his wife, Dr. Ruchira Ghosh, is here. I'm very grateful to her. We hope that in next 2 years, our fourth report will also come on time. It will also be thematic. Already ideas are coming on which theme we should go. I hope that ILO will be part. Request Mr. Satoshi Sasaki to take the steps just now, also to Radhika and Sher, so that it materializes. So with these words, I thank you again for being here. I will come again for very briefly at the time of presentation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sharma. I now invite Mr. Satoshi Sasaki, Deputy Director of ILO Decent Work Team for South Asia and Country Office for India, for his welcome address. As I said, that this report has been jointly prepared by with ILO, ISD and ILO, and this event has also been jointly organized with ILO. I invite you to kindly for your.
Namaskar and good morning to you all. It is a pleasure to be here today at the launch of the India Employment Report 2024, focusing on youth employment, education, and skills, which has been prepared by the Institute for Human Development and the ILO. At the outset, I would like to welcome the chief guest, Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, the Chief Economic Advisor, the Government of India. Chairperson of the panel discussion, Professor Deepak Nayyar. Dr. Rana Hassan, Ms. Sunita Sanghi, Mr. A.K. Bhattacharya, Professor Alak Sharma, Professor Ravi Srivastava, ILO technical specialists, IHD and ILO teams, all the distinguished experts, speakers, guests, and participants. The India Employment Report 2024 is the third of a series of regular publications by the IHD on labor and employment issues. This report examined the challenges of youth employment in the context of India's emerging economic, labor market, educational, and skills scenarios, and the changes witnessed over the past 2 decades. The world of work is undergoing a transformation that will continue and potentially intensify in the coming years. India remains poised to take advantage of its demographic dividend, though the situation varies across the country. The flip side of India's potential demographic dividend is the challenge of providing employment, especially quality employment, which becomes extremely daunting because of the numbers involved. The country hosts the largest population of youth in the labor force. Additionally, a large proportion of workers are engaged in informal employment, marked by decent work deficit arising from job insecurity, income insecurity, lack of effective social protection, low prevalence of the workers' organizations, and limited social dialogue. India is a key driver for achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by addressing such decent work deficits. The ILO's mandate of social justice and decent work for all calls for a particular focus on improving the quality of existing jobs, apart from the addition of a huge number of decent work opportunities for the existing unemployed and new entrants to the labor force, including women, youth, and differently abled. This must also take into account the growth and patterns of new forms of employment, such as in the gig and platform economy and the e-commerce service industries. In this current context, India Employment Report 2024 is of paramount importance. The report highlights 5 key policy areas for further actions, which apply more generally and also specifically for youth in India. 1, making production and growth more employment intensive. 2, improving employment quality. And 3, addressing labor market inequalities. 4, strengthen skills and active labor market policies. And 5th, bridging the knowledge deficit on labor market patterns and youth employment. I would like to take this opportunity to mention that last year, we launched a Decent Work Country Program 2023 to 2027 for India, which is formulated by the ILO and tripartite constituents. It is grounded in the strategic pillars of ILO: employment, universal social protection, social dialogue, and fundamental principles and rights at work, including health and safety at the workplace, in line with the international labor standards and along with the SDGs. In particular, the SDG goal number 8, promote inclusive and sustainable economic growth through and productive employment and decent work for all. Decent Work Country Program, aligned with the resilient economic growth, climate action, and women-led development, which are India's key priorities as it moves forward from the G20 presidency last year. Given this background, I hope that with India Employment Report 2024, will serve as a timely and constructive input for the policy makers, social partners, civil society organizations, and other researchers in the coming years. And I look forward to the launch and the deliberations today about the key findings and the recommendation of the report. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Mr. Sasaki. It is now time for the highlights of the report. I invite the report team leaders, Professor Alaken Sharma, Professor Ravi Srivastav, and Dr. Sher Singh Verik to make the presentation.
Yes.
The very good initiative. Yeah.
Friends, I'm here only briefly, and then my colleagues Ravi and Sher will join. This report is in 3 parts. The first part is generally the evolution, changes in the pattern, structure of labor market in India, and challenges emerging in the wake of data analysis since 2000. We have taken generally 2 periods, 2000 to 2012, and then 2012 to 2019, and 2019 to 22-23, because it was a COVID period. The first part of the report is this. Also, there is a chapter on linkage of growth with employment, because this is a very debatable topic. The second part is on youth employment, education, and skills. And you can say third part, concluding part, which provides the conclusion and policy. So just some highlights of the first part I will give you. As you can see on the slide, these things are also known, they are in public domain, that key labor market indicators in general have improved during recent years, particularly since 2019. As you can see from the graph, labor force participation rate, workforce participation rate, and unemployment rate show a long-term deterioration between 2000 and 2018, but an improvement thereafter. It has come in the newspapers, media, several articles have come. This improvement coincides with periods of economic distress, both pre and post-COVID-19, with exception of 2 peak COVID periods. As such, it is rather surprising why this improvement has taken place. And this improvement we have not analyzed in detail, needs more analysis, but it needs further interpretation cautiously, as jobs generated in the slowdown period raises issues regarding the drivers of change. Which are the drivers of change? When there was economic distress. But it is good thing that several labor market indicators have improved. When you see the second slide coming to, this is labor force participation rate. Again, labor force participation rate as a whole has increased slightly, but female labor force participation rate, which has been declining in India, started rising since 2018 rather, but fastly from 2019. And now you can see from the lowest line, lower line, it is something like 37%, which is quite high. It was as low as 23% in 2018. So again, although it is again one of the lowest in the world, even this rate, and it is mainly in rural areas. This increase is mainly in rural area. So why this is high reason? This is again, there are several demand and supply factors. I'm not going into detail due to dearth of time. Coming to quality of employment, in India, there has, as I said, there has been significant rise in employment, quantity of employment in recent years. But still, employment is largely dominated by poor quality employment. Poor quality employment in the informal sector. There has been rise in informal employment. The other important aspect is that over the years in India, quality of employment has been improving, and which is best reflected by gradual and steady increase in the share of regular employment in the labor force. It has been since 2000, rather earlier also it has been increasing. But suddenly, for the first time, after 2019, the regular employment has, the increase has been halted, rather slightly it has declined. And also there has been a rise in something like 5-6% self-employment. Mind it, India has one of the highest share of self-employment in the world. One of the highest, maybe among 10 countries in the world where it is highest. And this is, again, accounted for mostly by a rise in unpaid family worker. Something like from 2019 to 2023, 5% increase in unpaid family workers. I'm not going into why it has happened, but all these are issues which need to be debated and discussed in more detail. Again, coming to employment quality and conditions again, I come to real wages. Real wages in India, which is a very important indicator of quality of employment, have been largely stagnant or falling. Surprisingly, compared to earlier years, in recent years, regular wages have shown decline, but casual wages have shown significant increase. And to that extent, it is a very healthy trend, because casual workers are the poorest workers in the country. And another aspect which I would like to point out, that wage, the wage pattern, growth of wage pattern, the casual wages or even real wages mostly has, in the bottom 40%, the increase is much more compared to the higher level. So wage distribution in India have improved compared to earlier years. But I'm not talking about income distribution. I'm talking about wage distribution between 5 quintiles in India. It has improved because the lowest workers, casual workers, they have improved rather significant increase compared to the higher category of workers. So this is a rather positive trend. Now, I will take a few more minutes, 2-3 minutes, coming to a structural transformation. You know that this is a very hotly debated topic in development literature, that India has not achieved a structural transformation. There was In the report, we have a chapter, rather third chapter goes into detail about it. The drivers of a structural change, of course, it has been quite slow, but there has been slow and a steady structural transformation taking place in India. Slow, moving from agriculture to services and construction, not to industry, not to manufacturing. This has been happening. But suddenly, after again 2008, 2009, this has been halted. Because this rise in share of agricultural employment is quite high. In fact, rise in agricultural employment is more than the rise in agricultural productivity. Agricultural output. So quality of agricultural employment must have deteriorated. So this is a somewhat worrying trend, because people going to agriculture rather more and more. Why it has happened? Because of the COVID, mostly because of the COVID. But I think this is a transitional phase, and we will return to the old phase. In the report, we have constructed a employment structure index. This index consists of 6 types of employment considered: regular employment, regular and informal employment in the organized sector. Very, very detailed. I'm not going into it. But this graph shows that how slowly India was moving towards a structural transformation, although not manufacturing, but away from agriculture. But again, from 2019, it is constant, almost constant, from 3.07 to 3.05. So this is, again, we have to move towards non-agriculture, because agriculture is not our solution. It doesn't mean that agriculture we have not to improve. Lastly, and then I will give to my colleagues, we have rather, we say innovative. We have prepared a employment quality condition index, depicting quality of employment in the country at a state level. And this is based on this, so we have taken 7 variables: percentage of workers engaged in regular formal work, percentage of casual laborers, percentage of self-employed workers belonging to poverty line, work participation rate, average monthly earnings of casual workers, unemployment rate of secondary and more educated workers, and need. We experimented with several other variables, but lastly we thought of in which this index preparation, Dr. Manna, myself, Ravi, Sher, several rounds of discussions. And then we came out with this table. Just you can see, this is a state-wise table. The first point is that since 2005, we have given 2005 and 2021-22. Quality of employment in all states of India at varying degrees have improved. Everywhere, which is evident from the increase in the score. But another important part is that in 2005, states like Bihar, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, they were at the bottom. And even now, they are at the bottom. Some developed states, Delhi, Himachal, Uttarakhand, Gujarat, they were on the top, still they are top. But there have been movement in between. So this is a very interesting pattern which has emerged and which throws light on the persistence of the dynamics at regional level labor market in the country. So I won't go take much time. Now I give floor to my colleague Ravi.
Thank you, Alak, and thanks to all of you for coming here today for this release. I'll be dealing with the chapters on youth employment, skill training, and basically focusing on the youth part of the report, which is in a sense the crux of the focal area of this particular report. I just wanted to point out that the years that we've taken for comparison, we have taken 2000, 2011, 12, and then we've taken 2018, 19 because that is the last pre-COVID year for purposes. But many of the trends that we observe actually began in the earlier year, began in 17, 18. But we have not talked about 17, 18 specifically. And then, of course, in most cases, we go up to 2023, 2020, in some cases, only up to 21, 22, because of the lack of time that we had to revise the report comprehensively after the latest NSSO report and PLFS report came out. So I think the first point, general point, which is well understood, is that India has a brief period of opportunity, window of opportunity open to it over the next decade, where we will still see an expansion in the ratio of the working force, the proportion of the working age population in this country. And this is a period in which we can potentially exploit our demographic dividend. And that is why there is an urgency on this whole question of youth employment in particular. Now, if you look at labor force participation rate in youth versus adults, we notice, of course, and this is something to be expected, that youth LFPR is much lower than adult rates. It also shows a declining trend in 2018, driven primarily by greater participation in education, which is something we will also deal with the non-student part of youth participation later on. But this reversed after 2018. As also did the overall labor force participation rate. And this fluctuation was mainly attributable to young women in rural areas, because their participation went up, as Alak has already pointed out, for the population as a whole also. The young people engage actually more in non-farm sectors than adults, and young males much higher than females. Over time, if you look at the long term up to 2018-19, the youth shifted out of agriculture much more than adults. So there's been much, more rapid diversification. But however, this trend reversed since 2019 with increasing participation of youth in agriculture, especially among young females in the construction sector. So just as it happened, the structural part that Alak had pointed out with respect to the labor force as a whole is also observed with respect to the youth, in fact, in greater significance. If you look at the sectoral features of youth employment, between 2018-19, we find that the youth employment increase in construction, areas like ICT, business, financial services, retail, trade, transport, electronics, education, and health. Initially, agriculture, the employment among youth declined quite significantly up to 2019 by 36.4 million. Industry expanded, but mainly due to expansion in construction, and service area expanded quite significantly. But over the last few years, agriculture expanded very significantly. The agricultural employment among youth by 14.4 million. Industry expanded, but mostly due to construction. Manufacturing employment was virtually stagnant, increasing only by 1.7 million. service sector employment among youth were also more or less stagnant, increasing only by 1.8 million. So the rapid the expansion in employment of youth that took place in recent years was mainly due to agricultural employment. Now, as far as quality of employment is concerned, the quality of employment among youth, and this is the youth, of course, speaking about averages, is worse than the quality of employment among adults. This probably has to do with also lesser experience in the job market that they have. So we find, of course, that there's a great deal of informality and so on. But although the share of youth in the formal sector tended to be higher than that of adults in general, what we find again is that concurrent again with the adult population in the overall labor force, we find that after 2019, the share of formal employment declined, the share of formal sector employment declined, regular employment declined, regular formal employment declined, and so on. But of course, as jobs were shed from the contractual temporary jobs were shed from the formal sector, the share of formal jobs within the formal sector, which shrank, did increase over the last few years. Again, coming back to the self-employed, there was a great deal of expansion in self-employment among youth, as also happened with the overall population rate. And this has mostly happened in the sphere of unpaid family employment. So that unpaid workers increased very significantly over this period of time. As far as real earnings are concerned, if you look at the real earnings among youth, the regular self-employment, whether you look at regular wage employment or self-employment, youth's real earnings were either stable or marginally declined. And although there was a small increase in casual wages in recent years after 2019. Now, technological change and digitalization are very rapidly affecting the demand for skills for certain types of employment among youth. And we will say a little more about skills among youth. However, the proportion of high and medium skilled jobs is greater among youth than older people. So there is a greater proportion of youth who are concentrated in medium and high skills. Although, as we shall see, the proportions are actually quite low. In services and to a lesser extent in manufacturing, youth are more likely to be in high and medium skilled jobs. Young people are also better represented in the gig and platform economy, where, however, jobs remain very insecure. Now, looking at the skill composition of youth, if you look at the first figure in this, the skill composition of youth has increased, but it has not increased by much. If you look at the share of youth in high and medium skilled jobs, this share increased from about 8% to about 14.9% from over the 2022 year period. So the majority of youth, that is 85% youth, even in 2022, were either in unskilled or in low-skilled jobs. And this, as we shall also show later, is an area of major concern because the aspiration of of youth to be in medium and high-skilled jobs has been consistently increasing with increasing education among them. The need, as far as the youth not in education, employment, or training is concerned, their share is not only very high, but has also increased from 29.9% in 2000 to 33.4% in 2019. But it reversed after 2019 and decreased to 28.5% in 2022. So there's, as as certain other labor market changes took place between 2019 and 2022, the share of the NEET youth did decline a little bit. There's a high share of females in NEET. Their share actually is around 5 times that of their males. And basically, the NEET youth fall in 2 categories: the unemployed youth and the youth who are out of the labor force. And this, of course, requires different strategies, as we also point out later on. Now, we come to the chapter on education and levels of education and education skills and so on, and the question and relation to employment. And basically, between 2000 and 2009 and 22-23, we find that there's been a rapid improvement in access to education, in education attainment among youth, with the share of youth with secondary and above education and also with graduate education actually rising quite rapidly. Up to secondary education, their share increased by more than twice, and graduate and higher levels increased 3 times, which was a very positive development. But still 43% of the youth had less than secondary level education in 22-23. So you do still find a kind of a duality. Now, when you look at the access to education by gender, location, region, social group, expenditure quintile, and so on, what you find is that there are persistent large gaps. Although these gaps have tended to decline after 2000, between 2000 and between 22-23, the gaps have tended to decline a little. They have persisted at the level of graduate education and above. They've declined at lower levels of education, but nonetheless, they still remain. So the opportunities of youth, a lot of youth with lower levels of education have less opportunities to participate on equal terms in the employment market, and this is something we'll point out later on also. As far as technical education and vocational training is concerned, basically technically qualified youth in India is still very low. Although there has been some improved propensity among technical and professional education among youth with graduate education. But overall, only 4.6% youth were technically qualified. Now, the access, again, the large disparities by sex, location, social groups, expenditure quintiles, etc., among youth with technical education. As far as vocational training is concerned, the extent of formal vocational training in India continues to be very low, only about 4.1% in 22-23. This has been a cause of major concern, and we will analyze this. We analyze this a little later in the report. Now, we then look at actually the differences across gender, differences across social groups, and basically persistent differences are there in the level of skill training among youth, whether you go although by gender, there is a decline in the gap, but still the gaps themselves are quite persistent across all these years. And actually, although the objective of youth skill training in India has to be to target youth with low levels of education or dropouts, what we find is that formal skill training has been very highly concentrated among highly educated youth. Youth with secondary and above education and with graduate and above education. And also very concentrated in higher quintiles. So formal skill training is actually quite concentrated. Now, when it comes to ICT skills, which are becoming increasingly important, we find that nearly 3/4 of the youth are unable to send an email or an attached file. So majority of youth actually still lack ICT skills with differences across rural, urban, and female, male, as well as across regions. There are very large differences in proficiency with ICT skills, and also ownership of computers and so on and so forth. Now, returns to education, we computed returns to education using the Messerian type of function over several years. And what we found were results were very interesting. First of all, the returns to education among youth with a graduate degree were 5.6 times higher than that of youth with a secondary or higher secondary level of education. The returns to education among youth with a postgraduate qualification were 9.2 times higher than that of youth with a secondary or higher secondary education. The returns to education, we find, declined over time, but the relative differences in the returns between the education levels of young individuals between secondary and higher, secondary and between graduate and postgraduate widened over time. So on the one hand, there was a general decline in the returns to education, but on the other hand, the gaps actually widened over time. The analysis of returns to different levels of education found that improvements at the lower levels of education brought very little incremental returns. And all this is a pointer towards the employment behavior, employment accessing behavior of the youth in India. Now, as far as worker population ratio for the non-student youth is concerned, because access to education and enrollment in education has been increasing, the worker population ratios actually show a decline over the 20 years between 2020 and 2022-23. Now, if you look at this table, this is a very interesting table. And if you look at table, this shows the workforce participation rate by education level. The topmost line in this shows you the workforce participation rate of education levels for male students. The line in between is for all students, and the line at the bottom is for female students. And what you find is the workforce participation rate for male students is actually an inverted U. So the workforce participation rate of male students actually declines with graduate and above education because of high levels of unemployment, as we shall show later. Whereas for females, it is a weak U-shaped curve. So their level of participation in the workforce improves as they're with higher levels of education, particularly graduate and above. Now, so we've done a series of exercises showing where are the youth employed by education levels. Basically looking at, first of all, regular salaried employment, then formal employment, then employment in services, in manufacturing, and so on. And what we find is in all these cases, the youth with technical degrees. I'm basically summarizing the next three slides here, the next two slides here very quickly. Sorry. Yeah, I'm summarizing it very quickly. What we find is that youth with higher levels of education, graduate and above in particular, much more likely to be in formal jobs, much more likely to be in regular jobs, much more likely to be in services and in basically in the non-farm sector than youth with lower levels of education. So there is a consistent picture of actually high levels of education providing better quality of employment and higher returns to youth. Now, we also present in this report the results of a survey which we carried out in Delhi and Ranchi. This survey was carried out in 1920. And this is very interesting because it actually looks at the job part, the job search part of youth in these two cities. And basically, we had targeted lower income youth in these localities. And what we find is that student employment preferences were largely white collar jobs, white collar public sector jobs. And among active job seekers, most had waited for more than a year to find a job. The major constraints of finding employment were non-availability of jobs matching with education, skills, and experience, dearth of regular jobs, and the high competition and the lack of local jobs in the local area. What we found, much to a surprise, pleasant surprise, is that almost all female students had aspired for jobs. And this contrasted with the very high proportion of female students who were ultimately in the NEET category. And the female respondents, as one would expect, reported that the main two reasons for opting out of employment were either family or childcare responsibility, or their family or the husband not wanting them to be in employment. This is something which the cultural reasons which we understand very well. Now, I come to this fairly crucial graph to show you two things. First, if you look at the bottom of the graph, what you find is that unemployment, the bottommost line in the bottom graph, what you find is that unemployment levels were elevated, were highly elevated in 2018-19, gradually increased and were highly elevated in 2018-19, and then actually have come down in the latest year. In 22-23, they have actually come down. But they are still more than twice the levels that they were in 2000. So youth unemployment levels still continue to be at highly elevated levels. If you look at the relationship between education levels and unemployment levels, you find that again there is a kind of a fluctuation with very high levels of unemployment by levels of education in 2018-19, but this tended to come down for graduate secondary students as well as graduate and above students by 22-23. So I think these two facts need to be kept in mind. Number one, that the general unemployment level among youth remain highly elevated, even though the levels have come down from very high levels in 2018-19. Secondly, that there is much higher employment levels among educated youth, secondary and above and graduate and above. And this fact has to be read along with the fact that there's a much higher proportion of youth who are secondary and above educated today and graduate and above educated today. And this brings us to the top graph. And the top graph shows that the share of secondary and above educated youth in the total unemployment youth has increased from about 35% in 2000 to 65.7% in 2022. So from about a third to 2/3 were all secondary and above educated youth. Now, we carried out an exercise to look at overqualification and jobs. And we found that a large number of highly educated youth, graduate and above, had taken up low quality jobs, blue collar jobs and low skill jobs, indicating mismatch or overqualification for the job. And this percentage for general graduate degrees, this percentage had increased over the years. For technically qualified youth, we find that a fairly significant percentage had taken up lower quality jobs, but the percentage had remained stagnant, had not increased over the years. So that there is a difference between the general graduates and the technical graduates as far as this is concerned. We turn next in the report to looking at skills and active labor market policies. So skills, as you know, active labor market policies actually try to bridge the gap between supply and demand in the short run. And skill training is important both for short term, looking at short-term mismatches, but also in terms of increasing the long-term employability of youth in the Indian economy. We note to begin with that the Indian skill scenario has changed rapidly over the past 25 years with a focus on standardization, market orientation, modular training, public-private partnership, and changing skill demand scenarios. So there has been a change over the past 25 years. And we point out the role that the institutions that have been set up in the last 25 years have been playing. We have looked in the report at the skill development programs, the major skill development programs and the apprenticeship programs, the new apprenticeship programs as well. And we note that actually the achievement among the major skill development, the PMKY is the umbrella program, which is now in its 4th version in India, have been very low in relation to the goals and the targets which have been set over time. The major issues that have been pointed out by committees are target shortfall, dropout rates, low placement of trained youth, and mismatches between supply and continued mismatches between supply and demand. As far as the apprenticeship programs are concerned, again, the participation of industry is still very low and his target achieves are relatively small in the apprenticeship programs. The major challenges to skill development and training are analyzed in this report, and there are four. The first is the obvious one, that there is very limited uptake of training, both due to supply and demand side constraints. Shortage of trainers in infrastructure, inadequate industry partnership, low returns from training, and hence low demand. Against a target of nearly 40 million trainees a year, which was set by in the national policy document, the actual achievement has been less than 2.5 million. Spatial imbalances in the provision of training programs. There is an urgent need for training in states which have a youth bulge. But yet it is precisely in these states that training capacity and demand are low. Low levels of socioeconomic inclusion in training. Formal training continues to be highly correlated with educational attainment and socioeconomic status, as we have also pointed out earlier. And then there is the overwhelming context of informality. Informality leads to market failure in skills, as neither employers nor workers see skill training as bringing returns. So these are some of the factors because of which skill training has not really picked up in India, the formal skill training. We go on to look at the other major plank of the National Skill Development and Entrepreneurship Development Policy, which is basically employment generation programs and entrepreneurship development programs. And we look at the major programs which focus on youth. There are a large number of other programs which don't generally focus on youth. And we find that these programs suffer from procedural delays, absence of monitoring and evaluation, the low quality of employment generated, and there is a lack of mechanism for regular assessment. So there are problems also with these programs, although the focus has changed in the last few years. We look finally at the job search assistance program, which are a very important component of the ALMPs. And of course, with digitalization, the scope for using digital information tools for job search and matching is increased. And there is a consistent need which has been felt for a national labor market information system as an integrated database. And this was proposed in the national policy on skills. Both online and offline solutions have been attempted in India. But we note in the report that overall impact of the job search assistance program in the country at the moment have been very, very low. So I stop here and I pass over the baton to you.
Well, thank you very much, Rabi. Let me start by also thanking IHD for this partnership and also the eminent guests on the table, including our chief guest, and all of you for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to be back in India from Geneva for this event and discuss these very important issues. Of course, you've heard many different trends and some improvements, some persisting challenges. Let me just pause briefly on the global scenario, which is not covered in the report, but given my day job, especially over recent years, just say a few words on that before coming to this emerging policy agenda. So, of course, the global scenario in terms of the labor market has been dominated by the impact of COVID, which hit all countries hard through those lockdown measures, which really brought economic activity to a halt. And then, of course, that was followed by a cost of living crisis, which has hit real incomes around the world. And of course, within that, youth has been a group that has been very much more impacted, as we've seen in previous crises. Youth, as also noted here in the case of India, that youth typically around the world are more vulnerable due to their more vulnerable position in the labor market in terms of the types of jobs, the lack of experience. So this is what we see in every crisis around the world, and you see the impact of those shocks in the labor market in terms of their specific vulnerability. But let me just say also in the last 2 years, 1.5 years or so, you've seen also a very strong recovery in advanced economies. We have very tight labor markets now in Europe and the US. There, of course, it's been driven by very large stimulus, particularly in the case of the US, massive economic stimulus that continued through post-COVID, but also very targeted measures that support youth. I mean, Europeans have spent a lot of time improving the type of responses that they have for youth, in particular, those not in employment, education, or training. And that, as noted, this is a real concern. Of course, Europe is very different than where we are in India. And discussing these issues, but it's worth looking at some of those experiences. Of course, also around the world, we see everyone in Geneva, everywhere I go, big discussions about what's now happening in terms of technology. It's all about artificial intelligence. Are our jobs going to disappear? What's the impact? And of course, I'm not here today to go into that. There's a very, very long discussion can be held on that, but there's clearly the world is going through some rapid technological change. The big question is, what does that mean for employment? And so a lot is happening, of course, globally as well. But it's also important now, coming back to the report, sorry for that little detour, to recognize when we look at the policy agenda, as already been pointed out, in the case of India, there's been a lot of action by the government at all levels and other partners to address many of these issues. So when we talk about the policy agenda, it's not that there is a vacuum. Indeed, as already noted, there are many initiatives that are there to address the issues around the demand side, job creation, skilling, entrepreneurship, etc. So that's, I think, a very important caveat I just would like to make. A second caveat, which is obvious to this audience, also obvious in the analysis, is that when we speak of India, there's no one agenda. There is, of course, important issues set at the central level, but fundamentally, as you know, and as also shown in the report, there are real issues differences at the state level that also will require different types of policy agendas. Not all states will be the manufacturing powerhouses, and we see big changes happening currently in some states, very promising changes that I think we'll see, major changes also in the labor market in the coming years. But other states will need to rely on other sectors. I mean, it's important caveat. So let me just come to what's been set out in the report in terms of the policy agenda. And, we've already taken up quite a bit of your time, and we would like to, of course, hear from our eminent guests. So I won't go into all the details, but you can see it is structured around five dimensions. It's a comprehensive policy agenda, which is not surprising given the complexity of those issues you heard about. And there's no one policy response that's going to solve any of those. And the first one deals with job creation. So making production and growth more employment intensive. It's about the overall job creation agenda linked to macro and sectoral policies to boost productive non-farm employment. In particular, looking at the role of modern manufacturing and service sector. The report does highlight certain sectors. And of course, already sectors have been identified in the Indian context in terms of the Make in India strategy, but also the incentives, the PLI, for example, et cetera, to support the new sectors. And they will play a very important role in creating jobs. But obviously, as said, for different states, this will pan out in different ways. In addition to the over sort of macro sectoral look, the role of MSCs is critical when it accounts for the vast majority of employment in this country, as it does in most countries of this level of development. And therefore, that role continues to be absolutely critical to solve the job story. Agriculture has come up a lot, and I think this is one of those new puzzles to has been debated a lot. But I think it's also interesting to note. You see this in a few other countries. India's not unique in this increase in agricultural employment in this post-COVID period. I believe it needs a lot more careful analysis, also from a broader perspective. But clearly, the issue of agricultural productivity remains a key priority. But in addition, the report notes the opportunities there are to expand and invest in the green and blue economies, and also the important role of technology in that whole space. The second policy agenda is looking at the quality of jobs, and this is more focusing on the regulation and promoting more decent and productive employment, particularly for youth, reference to care, digital, but also other sectors. And of course, in this respect, very important steps have been made in the country in terms of the labor codes and other efforts to regulate employment. But of course, there continues to be the challenge of the informal economy that really is the one that needs to be addressed through that. And the access to social protection that has been a major goal of the government has been important in that regard. So there's also under that policy agenda mission, I don't have time to go into all the details, but it also refers to the importance of urbanization and migration policy. Because if you look at this whole story of structural transformation, it's not just about sectors, it's about where people are working. And even when I was based in India, there was a lot of discussion about, how jobs can be created in those smaller towns, the tier 2, tier 3 towns, their role within the broader structural transformation process. So it's also correct to also highlight that, also not just from the job creation, but the quality of job story. And the overall issue around minimum quality and basic rights of work through the regulation. So just coming to the third one, and this looks at a range of inequalities, and there are many issues there. I won't go into all the details, they're in the report, but there are two I want to flag, because they're ones that are very familiar to, but are very critical in this context. And that's firstly, of course, boosting women's participation in the labour market. This has been an issue that has been very much debated, discussed. I know a lot of efforts have been made by the government as well on this area, but it is a very complex issue, as you know. It involves, addressing a range of demand and supply side issues, also social norms, a very complex set of factors. And the report does flag a number of those, including, care, access to public transport, amenities, workplace safety, and these etc. The other one is, the second one that I want to flag is these young needs, because I think they really are very important. So these young people who are not in employment, education, or training. So that includes the unemployed, but it also includes those outside the labour force. So and as said, as you know, these are mostly women. I think it was 95% are women on that category. And that is, of course, very much linked to the first issue about women's participation. But I think this is where experience of other countries has shown that, very targeted but integrated, comprehensive approaches are needed to tackle those problems. It's not as, experience indicates it's much more complex to deal with those problems for young NEETs than it is for just the narrower group of unemployed. I mean, they are part of the NEET, but those non-unemployed NEETs are in particular and need those different strategies to tackle. That mission also covers other areas, including, education and digital divide, other forms of discrimination, and fundamentally a regional level policy approach, which is critical, I think, across all these missions. But it's given the regional inequalities that have been noted is very pertinent here. Just let me move then on to the fourth mission. And here we're, of course, more on the side of the supply in terms of skill, training, active labour market policies. And a lot has happened in this country. Obviously, this has been a major priority for a number of years. The report highlights some steps in terms of further strengthening the skills ecosystem, job search, counselling. And of course, I think that the challenge as well is having that integrated approach and how you link those also for the most vulnerable groups in the labor market. Let me just then come to the last one, which is something that is very important, not just for research purposes, but of course for policy purposes. And that's about bridging the deficits in knowledge on labor market patterns, particularly for youth. And here, this is also not unique to India. We are seeing this rapid rise of gig and platform economy. My colleague Umar Rani is here, who's one of our leading experts on this area, doing a lot of work in this country as well. It's about understanding better through access to data and statistics on what's happening in the gig and labor platform economy. We will need to monitor what's happening through technological change, AI. I think we have to be realistic about what's happening there, but nonetheless, this is one of the key challenges in the coming years. So, we need to look at new data sources and forms of data to complement what comes through the official sources as well. And I think, a very important area that can be further explored is the use of administrative data for better analysis in terms of what's going on in the labor market. So on this point, let me stop here, because I know, we have some very eminent speakers and guests to give us their insights on this topic. But thank you very much for your attention.
So much to all the report team leaders for comprehensively presenting the highlights of the report. And now is the moment for the national launch of the report. I request our chief guest, Dr. Anant Nageshwaran, to kindly launch the report, and also all the people on the dais to kindly join him in launching the report. Yes, it is a photograph moment. I request all the report team contributors, the team members, to kindly come on and join the people here. We already have the team leaders, Professor Ravi Srivastava, Professor Lakshman Sharma, and Dr. Sher Singh Vedic, Dr. Balwant Singh Mehta, Dr. GC Manna, Dr. Tanuka Endo, Siddharth Dote, Diksha Tayal, Shipra Nigam. Kindly join on the stage. All the people who are present here, please join them.
We'll still do a final thing.
Please.
People don't want to have hard copies.
Shipra, Diksha, join from that side.
On this side.
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, this is the photographic moment. Calls for a round of applause. The India Employment Report 2024, Youth Employment, Education and Skills, jointly brought out, prepared by Institute for Human Development and the International Labour Organization. Yeah. Congratulations to the team and to both IHD and ILO. I now invite the chief guest of this function today, Dr. Anant Nageshwaran, Chief Economic Advisor, Government of India, to kindly address the gathering.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Since we are running quite a bit behind schedule, I hope the eminent persons would forgive me for acknowledging their presence collectively rather than mentioning their names individually. I first of all begin by commending the report in terms of its timeliness, relevance, comprehensive coverage, wealth of data, the various surveys undertaken, the diagnosis of the issues, and above all, the underlying care and concern for the cause, which is youth unemployment. The report deserves praise for its breadth and depth. It puts a magnifying glass on the intricacies of labor market challenges, including opportunities and the issues to overcome. It also undertakes deep analysis through unit-level data of various NSS surveys to come up with numbers on the percentage of workers not getting minimum wages, etc., table 2.8, and the incidence of poverty, table 2.9, etc. And we also saw the attention to detail in the presentation that was shared with us a few minutes ago. The report is therefore quite long, comprehensive, and excellent on diagnostics, and somewhat, let me add, somewhat unsurprisingly, short on answers or specifics, except a few that I recall. One on including gig workers in more than one labor code, and on statistical data, administrative information systems on various dimensions of the labor market. As I said, it is not a lacuna, it is not a shortcoming, but that is the nature of the problem we are dealing with. Of course, in terms of statistical data and the ease of access, etc., I can add that those of us who are engaged in downloading labor market data from the website of the Labor Bureau in Chandigarh may be entitled to a hardship allowance. The reason why I said that the absence of specific solutions is not a complaint or a criticism, but par for the course, I want to recall a film from 1970s when I was probably somewhere around 10, 12 years of age. It was a movie which was first originally a play and then became a very famous movie, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, by the noted Tamil journalist, lawyer, actor, Cho Ramaswamy. And in that play, he becomes a prime minister. He comes as a Tughlaq, the emperor, and then he becomes a prime minister, and then he begins to address various problems, corruption, the national language issue, and then the unemployment problem. And for that, he simply says, look, all I will do is I'll keep talking on every dice and every stage that we have to solve the unemployment problem. And that is my contribution to solving the unemployment problem. Because he said, this is not something that I can address. I would simply say, I will say that this problem needs to be addressed urgently in every forum I'm invited to speak at. So the point, therefore, here is that I think there is an element of truth in what he said in that movie. We should ask ourselves, what can the government do on employment short of hiring massively by itself? Of course, I do agree that it can and must hire in some areas. In fact, according to a very good paper by Devesh Kapoor in the Journal of Economic Perspectives some time ago, India may be lacking in capacity. I'm not talking about capability, talking about capacity in terms of numbers in several areas. And numbers are indeed part of the solution in terms of government employment. But apart from that, to think that for every social or economic problem that there is a government intervention is not quite correct. We need to get out of that mindset. In the normal world, it is the commercial sector, those who engage in for-profit activity, who need to do the hiring. Therefore, let us think in terms of what are the facilitative actions that the government has taken in recent years, which the report also has acknowledged. One is, of course, skill development, and I note the comments in the report on how the skill development initiatives, numerous as they are, in terms of the demand and supply, the availability of instructors, and also the dropout rates. Those are all issues that need to be addressed quite clearly. There is considerable scope for improvement. And I think the government is mindful of that. And of course, in spite of these challenges, which have been there for quite some time, the push to skill India has manifested in India's rising position in the world skill competitions from number 39 rank in 2011 to number 11 in 2022. Further, according to the India Skills Report 2023, the employable percentage of final year and pre-final year students has increased from 33.9% in 2014 to 51.3% in 2024. And combined with the rising enrollment in higher education, around 3.2 crores in 13-14 to 4.1 crores in 2021, the rising employability of graduates, as mentioned in the India Skills Report, implies that the workforce, young youth workforce, is expanding and is becoming increasingly employable. Although I do note that 51.3% employability means 48.7% still need to be covered. So we are aware of the other side of the story as well. And then what else the government has done apart from the skilling initiative? The new education policy is indeed an important structural reform in human development. Besides introducing the holistic multidisciplinary education with multiple entry and exit options, some of its key features include having no hard separation between vocational and academic streams, and the national credit framework for creditization of various dimensions of learning, academic, vocational, and experiential. The PM Shri schools launched in 2022 will demonstrate the implementation of the new education policy 2020, and these schools will emerge as role models for other nearby schools as well. Thus, NEP is to quality what Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan was to access, and therefore it is important that we also undertake efforts to make sure that this new education policy does not become hostage to political considerations, because the NEP is quite futuristic in nature and acknowledges the challenges that Indian youth will face from technological developments as well, and therefore prepares them accordingly. So its implementation is a national priority. And apart from these two, I'm moving on to other contributions that the government has made. In the 2018-19 budget, the government announced that it would pay 12% of the employer's contribution for new employees for Employee Provident Fund organization. The yearly net payroll addition to the EPFO, therefore, more than doubled from 61 lakhs in 18-19 to 139 lakhs in 22-23, bouncing back from the pandemic shock, also partly aided by the Atmanirbhar Bharat Rozgar Yojana. And there is a new income tax provision, 80JJAA, which allows weighted deduction for wages and salaries. It is there even in the new simplified alternative tax regime with fewer exemptions. This deduction has not been taken away in the new alternative tax regime available to tax assessees, corporate tax assessees. Indeed, we can state very confidently now that the tax code no longer favors capital accumulation over employment generation. Apart from these, of course, the government has invested in physical infrastructure, facilitating industrial and manufacturing growth and generating employment in those sectors. And restoring the health of financial institutions, such as banks and non-banks, is also essential for credit growth to resume, and it has. But we should also remember, and I think the report does partially acknowledge that labor and employment are subjects on the concurrent list. Therefore, plenty of action needs to happen on the states front as well. And the report could have maybe the next edition could focus on those dimensions of what the states can do or what states are doing, etc. Now, while I have mentioned the things that the union government has done, there is no gainsaying the fact that more can be done. Let me go through some of them myself. I think we have a long way to go in making our regulatory and tax policy implementation regimes less onerous, less cumbersome, less coercive, and also less predatory. For example, a recent article by Sanjeev Sanyal, a whole-time member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister, along with Ms. Akanksha Arora, talks of how prescriptive the National Building Code is. This is just by way of illustration. It is still not easy, for example, to close a business in India. Even now, there are arbitrary tax demands accompanied by demand for records over 6 years, and these demands are being made more often than they should be. And then more importantly, the management bandwidth in MSMEs to grow business, seek new markets, get funding, and hire is in general very limited. But that limited bandwidth is spent disproportionately on compliance. Whereas the union government frames the rules, the implementation or supervision is in the hands of the inspectors and supervisors who come from the relevant departments in the states. This is where senior levels of bureaucracies at the center and states can and should find ways to collaborate to make it easier for businesses to comply without being squeezed out of time and other resources. In 2019, yours truly, along with Mr. Gulzar Natarajan, the current finance secretary in the Andhra government, wrote this paper for Carnegie India in September 2019. And I quote one important document. In 2013, the Exim Bank of India analyzed labor laws and rules in select countries in Asia. And that report observed, at the macro level, the degree of intent of labor protection is similar in most countries and not very different from that of India. However, the distinguishing feature is that the administrative processes framed under Indian labor statutes are complicated, hindering flexibility in the labor markets, unquote. And then we also in this report go into the number of reports that need to be filed in hard copies, the number of approvals need to be taken at the Factories Act level, etc. So basically, I think this there is still a long way to go. While we have come a long way, there is still a long way to go in terms of reducing the compliance burden at the ground level. I already spoke about the importance of implementing new education policy. I won't go into that. That is my third area. And then the fourth area will be, I think, governments around the country and even around the world. Are they helping with their welfare policies that reduce the incentive to seek work? That is, in every public policy intervention, there is always the law of unintended consequences. In general, humans change their lifestyles and habits only when doctors read the right act on behalf of the human body. Does it not apply to our youth and others in respect of their willingness to work or efforts to equip themselves with skills and attitude towards work? Therefore, there needs to be a dispassionate and objective study on whether policies intended to ameliorate the negative consequences of unemployment end up disrupting the labor market for the worse. Now I come to the part which the report missed. That is the key players in job creation. That's the commercial sector. I came across an article in print recently about a woman who worked in the information technology sector, took maternity leave, became a mother, but could not re-enter the labor force. The article acknowledges that there is no dearth of policies that benefit women after childbirth. Women get paid maternity leave for 6 months after a 2017 amendment to the Maternity Benefit Act. It also covers work from home or hybrid work models. But there seems to be ingrained issues and prejudices in the corporate world, as the article notes. On paper, HR policies in the corporate world are not discriminatory against women, and companies do extol the benefits they provide. But according to the Maternity Benefit Act, companies with more than 50 employees should provide daycare facilities, but it has not been widely implemented. And the odds are stacked against women even before they get pregnant. If it is any consolation at all, it is not confined to India alone. A study in the UK concluded that nearly 1 in 5 HR managers are reluctant to hire women who may start families. According to the US-based National Bureau of Economic Research, on average, a quarter of women in the world will drop out of the workforce within a year of birth of their first child as a result of what they call, unfortunately, the motherhood penalty. So it is important to work persistently at the inertia and at the subtle or implicit resistance in the commercial sector, which is the feature of the workplace, even in large organizations, not only in India, but elsewhere. And I could say the same thing about workplace exposure and training for students of tertiary education. This is about the apprenticeship training and exposure. The report mentioned that this is an area of improvement, and they are quite right. Over the years, the government has created many enabling provisions to facilitate the hiring of apprentices. Under the National Apprenticeship Act promotion scheme, more than 25.5 lakh candidates have been trained since 2018-19 until October 23. But the gap persists, and the industry can and should do better. I do have one critical observation to make on this on the issue of female labor force participation rate. As the report notes, is it indeed distress-driven, as the report mentions repeatedly? I quote from the executive summary. The number of youth in self-employment expanded much more than in other categories of employment during the pandemic, which was mostly in household unpaid work, especially among rural women, and considered the worst form of employment. This is a quote from the executive summary. Let me share a few facts. Female labor force participation rate has been rising for 6 years now, from 23.3% in 17-18 to 37% in 22-23, driven by rural women. This has been accompanied by a rise in the share of self-employment and agriculture among working women, interpreted as distress-driven in the report, but that needs a relook. The rise in rural female employment has been contributed to both by own account worker employer category, rising from 19% to 27.9% in 22-23, and the unpaid helper category going up from 38.7% to 43.1%, which is a relatively smaller rise, of course, indicating a rising contribution of females to rural production. This is plausibly a culmination of many factors, including continuous high growth in agriculture output and freeing up women's time due to substantial expansion of access to basic amenities such as pipe drinking water, clean cooking fuel, sanitation, etc. This is also reflected in the PLFS data, which show a significant shift for women away from domestic duties. Second, while the composition of the female workforce has been tilting towards agriculture, that of the male workforce is tilting away from agriculture. The rise in the share of agriculture in rural female workforce from 73.2% in 17-18 to 76.2% in 22-23 coincides with the more significant decline in the share of agriculture in the rural male workforce from 55% to 49.1% in the same period. Third, within the rural female workforce, there is a structural shift marked by a rising proportion of skilled agricultural labor, from 48% in 18-19 to 59.4% in 22-23, and that is 11.4% increase, and a decline in the share of elementary agricultural laborers using considerable physical effort, which came down from 23.4% to 16.6% over the same period. Among skilled agricultural female workers, market-oriented workers have driven the expansion, possibly filling up for men leaving agriculture and contributing to family income. Thus, the feminization of agriculture points to a much-needed structural shift within agriculture, where excess male labor moves out and remaining female labor is utilized efficiently. Therefore, the participation of women in agriculture need not be dismissed as worthless or distress-driven. The monetary contribution of women to rural family incomes also matters from the lens of intra-household bargaining power and decision-making, marking an important shift in the societal gender dynamics. Let me come to my last point. The report correctly notes that agricultural labor force was shrinking steadily at a rate of 1.6% per annum between 2004 and 14, which went up slightly to 1.7% per annum from 2014 to 2019. As one should expect in a growing economy, agriculture's share of labor force was coming down. COVID reversed it. According to CLEMS data, 40 million people went back into agriculture in 1920 and 2021. It will take time to unwind. In 21-22, manufacturing created 4 million jobs, so the unwinding process has begun. In fact, the manufacturing sector between 2014 and 19 on net shed jobs rather than adding jobs. So many slides that were shown here today also pointed out that 18-19, there was a deterioration, and then there has been improvement post 2019 and so on. We should remember that the second decade was a decade marked by decline in capital formation in the economy, decline in credit growth, and it was also due to some policy decisions such as retrospective taxation, etc., which dampened the overall investment climate, and therefore investment rate as a percentage of GDP came down, which could have had its impact on employment generation and hiring of labor, etc. Hopefully, those things are a thing of the past. Credit growth is now running at close to 20% non-food credit growth. Balance sheets of companies and banks are in good shape. And hiring, if you look at 21-22 data on the CLEMS database, employment in agriculture declined by 15 lakhs. Manufacturing went up by 37 lakhs. Services employment also rose by a similar number. And construction sector generated 29 lakhs in terms of jobs. This trend, we hope, will continue in the future, as indicated by the robust gross value added growth in manufacturing and construction sectors. So, in sum, we hope that many of the concerns about India's labor market dynamics, well highlighted in the report, arising out of the pandemic and also the previous decades' investment and credit market adjustment will slowly dissipate, giving rise to better job creation in the coming decade. This brings me to my very last point. Discussions on the report's contents and what to do about them must involve the commercial sector, industrial units, industry associations, and academia. But unless I am mistaken, there are no industry bodies, industrialists, or academics who are part of today's panel, or perhaps not among the audience, not perhaps in sufficiently large numbers. It is not very productive for farmer and current government officials, international bodies, and think tanks to get together and discuss and conclude that the government should do more. Industry and academics should talk more and more often between themselves on how to be relevant to each other's needs and expectations. That is what brings me back to my original point. It is incorrect to think that for every problem, there is a government intervention that solves it. The diagnosis is easier than resolution, and that is why it is important to continue the efforts involving all the relevant stakeholders who are best placed to create jobs. Finally, I commend the IHD and ILO for bringing out this report and thank them for inviting me to launch this report. And it is such an important document in terms of the breadth and depth of data and coverage. We will continue to deliberate on its findings and recommendations in the government, I assure you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Nageshwaran, for such an insightful address. I now request Professor Deepak Nair to kindly moderate the panel discussion. Thank you.
On behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank the report team leaders, Alak Sharma, Ravi Srivastav, and Chair Verick for their succinct presentations. I would also like to thank our chief guest, Anant Nageshwaran, for his insights into the report and his concerns about what should be done. Employment is India's biggest economic, social, and political challenge, not just for the past half century, but also for the next quarter century. I think it is on. It lies at the heart of our aspirations to reap the demographic dividend. Whether or not we succeed will depend entirely on what we do in terms of employment creation. Just as it lies at the heart of Prime Minister Modi's aspiration for a developed India by 2047, by which I can only infer he means that we will reach upper middle income status, which China has just done. And that at this moment seems on the distant horizon. I think the India Employment Report, which has been done by the IHD and the ILO working together, is an important contribution to knowledge and understanding of the employment problem in India. I would particularly like to commend it for the fact that it is evidence-based. For too often, there are generalizations and prescriptions that have no foundation in reality. And in doing this evidence-based research, they have attempted to provide us an analysis, a diagnosis, and a prescription. An analysis of the trends and outcomes with a focus on youth employment and unemployment, which lies at the heart of our employment crisis, with some attempt at setting out a policy agenda. I would agree with Anant Nageshwaran when he said that it is no surprise that while we are rich in analysis and diagnosis, we are short on prescription. But that's not the team alone or the report alone. It is as much government, academia, industry, civil society. We are all struggling with this conundrum. But this report is an important beginning. Now, we are exactly 45 minutes behind schedule. What I would like to suggest is that we try and finish at 1:45, which is an hour from now. That means we are still half an hour behind schedule, but I don't think we should stand between you, lunch, or any other commitments that you might have. So I would request our distinguished panelists, and I'm sorry that Montek is unable to come, but he did also call me. He has a genuine problem with his knee and mobility. But we have three distinguished panelists with us, Rana Hassan, Sunita Sanghi, and Ashok Bhattacharya. I would urge them, if possible, to set out their comments as panelists in 10 minutes each, or as close to it as possible, so that we have half an hour for question and answers from those who've had the time and the patience to come here and to sit through it. Rana, would you like to begin? I'll simply follow the order that is there on the program.
Thank you very much, Professor Nair. I will use some slides that I have over here. And just being conscious of the time, I will make sure that I stick to the time allotted. So first of all, I found this an excellent report. And it's sure to be a very valuable resource for all stakeholders, including policymakers and researchers. It's been said already a number of times, not to belabor the point, but the analysis of micro records of the labor force surveys, the ASI data, national accounts data, the CLEMS data is something that was very unique, but provided a lot of insights. Also, the issue of analyzing trends over a long period of time, 20 plus years. Finally, the report summarizes its findings and talks about policy implications in terms of 5 missions. So here, let me just provide a few thoughts on some of these issues. The first one was on regional variation, and the report does talk about how the different states are doing. And I thought here I would just share, some work that I've been doing with a colleague of mine, and also just maybe point out that when you actually take India and categorize the states, you find the news is much more welcome. Now, certainly for the states which are doing better, but these bar charts, basically what they represent is they're trying to capture structural transformation in employment. They're trying to basically say, okay, look, what are the changes in employment that are taking place, and where is employment coming down? Where is employment going up? And what you see is that the states that we have basically categorized as the leading states, the states basically which have had relatively high GDP growth over the last 5 to 7 years, are the ones where you're seeing this structural transformation taking place in the most accelerated fashion. That's over here in the blue bars. You can see that the biggest reductions in agricultural employment shares, and you're actually seeing that manufacturing share of employment is actually the one that is quite dramatic in these states. So in other words, while it's fine to look at India-specific numbers, this is a huge country. It's the largest country in the world. You have to think, you have to break it down into appropriate subnational levels. So the finding there, I think, is provides one hope. That look, there are some good things happening in several places. What can we learn from them? Second issue that I want to just get to is the big question is, why aren't there more good jobs? And essentially, you have to think in terms of supply and demand. From the supply side of labor, essentially 2 things. One is skills. A worker supplies skills, and there's also this issue of matching of jobs and workers. So the supply side of labor, we can think in terms of the skills and matching issues, but you have to confront the reality that ultimately there's also the demand side. And I think probably it's not just for India, but for many developing countries, maybe even the advanced countries, I think the general feeling is that when you look at these supplies and demand side issues, it's really the demand side of labor, which is probably the main factor behind lack of jobs. And I'm not going to get into the details, but this is basically a set of points that have come through some very rigorous assessments of skills development programs. I know it's very fashionable to say let's have a skills development program, let's set up skilling centers here and there, but we have to remember that the design of these programs is extremely important. In fact, when I looked at a little bit at the literature. There are some good studies out there which takes the most rigorous evidence that is out there on skills development and the effectiveness they have from around the world. And essentially, the lessons seem to be, I've listed the lessons. You have to really think in terms of training that is market driven. And that sort of goes to the point the chief economic advisor was making. The role of industry is critical. If we're setting up skilling centers in locations where there's not much, not many factories coming up, not many new business parks coming up, this is an uphill battle. You've got to pay attention to trainers. You've got to perhaps link payments for the delivery of these programs to results. There are many other things. I'm not going to go into them, but essentially you have to be very sensitive to demand. One thing I'll just say here from some of the experience we're having at ADB is that it's an interesting idea that where you provide skilling centers, do it in the locations where something new is happening. So at ADB, we have these industrial corridor development programs. We've identified these nodes with the various state governments. And those are the places where action is taking place. Those are the places where government have made an effort to bring in some anchor investors. Those are good places to put together skilling centers. But once again, I really believe you have to really push the private sector for this. Education is really the responsibility of governments, but when it comes to skilling for jobs, I think we're letting our private sector off the hook far too easily. They need to be paying for this a lot more. Now, where will the demand for jobs come from? And I think here, something that the report didn't pick up on, it's the issue of trade. There's really a lot of employment potential from trade that I think we are not. We like to talk about, there's deglobalization taking place, et cetera, et cetera. There's a recent book which is talking about how India has missed the bus on labor-intensive manufacturing, and we think this is just too pessimistic. Here are some numbers, and I have to thank one of my colleagues who's worked with NCR, Sanjeev Pohit, with input-output tables. And we were just, we requested them to just give us the numbers on direct, indirect job creation. And basically here, we've put together 4 sectors, textiles and apparel, electronics, leather and footwear, IT services. And you can see that the maximum bang for the buck really comes from textiles and apparel. Mm-hmm. If you can get jobs going in this sector, this is going to create lots of jobs, directly, indirectly. Services, not too surprising, tend to be the lower tend to be generating jobs in lower magnitudes. Another thing, skills requirement. I'm not showing you the chart, but essentially we've looked at just the educational attainments of workers in different sectors, both those which are direct, so the textiles and apparel firms, but also the indirect jobs. From the input-output tables, what are the educational attainments of workers over there? And no surprise, but the skills, the educational profile of those workers fits very well what you have in India, which is not that many very highly educated workers. So unlike services, IT services, fintech, et cetera, what some people are saying, that's what India needs to focus on. And that's well and good. India should focus on that, but India cannot neglect labor-intensive manufacturing. And the fact that there's scope to do this, this is just a simple chart which is showing the export shares of these 3 nations in global trade, in electronics and textiles and apparel. And you can see, even in a world in which global trade may be slowing, India's share is so low, and we know that China is vacating this sector in particular. Why can't India be entering? So I think global trade really presents an opportunity. Final point I'd like to make, I'm really glad that one of the missions was on urbanization. And here again, something that to me was good news in the data is, number one, it's something that I'm not showing here, but when we've looked at just wages across rural, urban India, small cities, big cities, what you find is that cities actually do a pretty interesting job in lowering things like the gender gap in wages. So you tend to find that the gender wage gaps, they start falling as you move from rural to urban India and as you move from smaller to bigger cities. We also find in the data, and this is PLFS and NSS EUS, you find that jobs in firms with 10 plus workers are better jobs. They pay more. The returns to education are higher in these firms. So in other words, we think urbanization and this process of formalization, both very important, both need to be accelerated. They will lead to an improvement in labor market outcomes. Let me stop there in the interest of time. I had a few more things I wanted to say, but let's leave that maybe for Q&A. Thank you very much.
We could come back to that in discussion. If there is time, we'll do that. Thank you, Rana, for the clarity and for the brevity, for keeping to the time. I think you made three very important points which have not come up so far. First, that interstate or interregional variations matter, and what can we learn from the success stories? Second, that the problem is creating a demand for jobs. Even if there are supply mismatches, they can be managed. And third, there are still enormous opportunities for India in manufacturing. And global trade is one aspect, but this country has the largest domestic market as well. So all three are promising avenues. Sunita Sanghi.
Thank you, sir. A very good afternoon. I think it's my pleasure to be part of this launch of this particular report because the subject has been very close to my heart as well. And I have been dealing in the subject for the last 2 decades and so. I think most of the speakers, they've already raised the issues, and I must compliment ILO and IHT for bringing out this report. We all know that the labor market is witnessing changes in terms of the way the work is organized. We have today gig economy or the platform economy, and more use of artificial intelligence and digitalization of the labor market. Now, these two changes necessitates that we have a very dynamic skill ecosystem. When we initiated way back in 2008, we never thought about these changes. And the kind of skill ecosystem that was developed then was only focusing on 3 issues: that how do we increase the scale, how do we improve the quality, and how do we make the skill aspirational. Number of initiatives were taken, and I think some of those initiatives have already been covered in the report. Now, but since then, the challenges have changed. Some of the challenges have been reported in the report in terms of that you have a very limited uptake. Then you have a spatial differences, you have a gender differences, these are there. But some of the issues and challenges which we are facing, which could be included in the report, are that there is an information asymmetry. Our chief guest had pointed out the point that there are a number of multitude of schemes which are being run by various central ministries or the state governments. But have you ever thought about that a candidate who looks into the various programs, how does it decide that which is the best program? Why we are facing that challenge that despite the fact that the government is spending so much of resources, we are not able to have a skilled manpower to that level. Because the candidate who looks into those various programs, he doesn't know. He has no information about the ranking of those schemes. He does not have. I think the report could throw some light on those issues, that how does the information flow to the candidate. That's from the supply side. But if you look at the demand side as well, the industry is also not very vigilant about it. They are also not very conversant about it. I'll just give an example. I visited a district called Madurai. When I discussed with the industry was not aware that there are training providers who are providing training on a particular job role which they require. And the training provider was not aware that industry required that job. So if we are able to include this challenge of how do we address the information asymmetry in the skill ecosystem, I think that will go a long way to sort out the problem as far as the skill is concerned. The second important challenge, I think, which is covered to some extent, but which needs to be focused much more, is that there is a lack of demand for formal skilling by industry.
Now, why they're not demanding? Because if you look at the structure of the Indian industry, it's very, it's occupied by the unorganized small industries where the workers, it's just on own account enterprises, is husband, wife, or maybe their relative or somebody. So they're not able to map their skills. If you're not able to map your skills, how will you get the skill training? It's very difficult. So we need to understand, because there's a lack of demand for the skill. So we need to create that skill. There's another point which is very important, that the large industry, they're also informalizing. They're wanting to not take the formal employees. They want within the formal ecosystem, they're hiring contract labor because of they just do not want to continue to pay the long-term liabilities on them. As a result, they're not interested because of the high attrition rate. They're not interested to reskill, skill, or upskill their manpower. That is why perhaps some of the reasons why they're not able to do it. The third important challenge, which we could have included, is that there's no mechanism to continuously assess the skill gap. The last survey, the environmental scan that was done was in 2016, was the NSDC, to just look into what kind of a job roles are required. At a pan-India level or at a state level, very few states are doing, though with the district skill committees coming into being, there is an effort on the part of the government to ensure that we have a very dynamic skill data available to us. We did start it in the Ministry of Skill Development, the Labor Market Information System. It's still work in progress, though there's a Skill India portal which does, but it does not capture both from the supply side or the demand side, the kind of skills that we require. As a result, we have more of a supply-driven ecosystem than a demand-driven ecosystem that we have in. Most of the job roles so far were very narrow. It's only now, with the coming of the new regulator, that we started thinking about that since there are changes in the labor market, it's being impacted by the technology, we need to have micro-credentials, we need to have knowledge-based job roles, we need to have multi-skills people, so that we are able to train people to meet the requirement of future of work. I think these issues could be highlighted and this could be covered in the report as well. Now, what we require today is a skilling ecosystem, which is based on mastery, which is based on modularization, and I think which ensures mobility. Towards that level, I think Government of India has taken a number of initiatives, whether it is National Credit Framework, or it is a Skill India digital platform, or it is approving or improving the apprenticeship program. But there are still many challenges in these, because when you look at the National Credit Framework, it may solve the problem, but then given the fact that we have 30 plus odd state boards in this country, making them and bringing them together on one platform and ensuring that the quality that the industry is looking in a candidate who comes, whether from the Meerut UP board or come from the CBSE board or come from Tamil Nadu, is the same. Because the credit is going to be the same, but whether the quality of education is going to be the same, that needs to be addressed. I think the NCVT is looking into the SOP and they are trying to address these issues, that when you look into the National Credit Framework, it should ensure the industry should feel confident that a child, a youth who is coming from whichever board that they're coming with a proper quality. Then we also need to look into convergence of policy. As the Chief Guest had indicated that we had multiple program, we need to have a whole of government India, whole of government approach. It should not be because the resources are limited. It's the same target group that we are addressing. And that is why I think the Skill India portal or Skill Digital portal will go a long way to ensure that the same candidate is not trained by various central ministries or by the state governments. That is what is required. We also need to scale up the skilling infrastructure and especially academies of trainers. I was doing a report with the Ministry of Steel on a green steel. There are companies like Jindal Steel or ArcelorMittal. They have been opening up the trainees, academies for trainers. I think similar academies for trainers can be opened up by the other industries also, because government cannot finance everything. Government has competing demands on its resources. So it is the industry participation, to bring about the industry participation. I think academies of trainers need to be facilitated and set up by the industry. So ultimately, they are the ones who are using the workforce. The last point I would like to make is that there needs to be emphasis on counseling, because there's no focus on counseling. I think that bit is also missing from the report. Because what has happened is that we wanted to make skill is not aspirational today. Even today, people think it is below the formal education. So today we have multitudes of resources. We can use AI to counsel, because the children are looking at towards their peer group, they are looking towards their parents or their friends to go for it. So if we can have proper counseling for the youth and counseling also for the industry, because industry also needs to be sensitized. The benefit of employing the skilled manpower, how it can improve the productivity, that their productivity and enterprise can have much better resources. So these are the things that needs to be brought out in the report as well. And this is what government is looking at. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita, and thank you for your emphasis on the skills ecosystem. Ashok, may I invite you?
Sure. Thank you very much, Professor Nair. Thank you, Dr. Sharma, and other eminent guests on the stage. What I will do in the next 10 minutes is try to look at this report wearing my economic journalist hat. I'm not going to comment on the data analysis, the findings, which are excellent, and many people here have already covered it in greater detail, except at the end, probably I would try to just highlight 3 critical issues that came to my mind, which require further attention. Many years ago, almost more than 70 years ago, when a man called Prashant Chandra Mahalanobis, who was considered by Nehru to be a man who should decide his industrial policy, the commanding heights of the economy, when he was asked again to set up the research system in the country, he, quite to the contrary opinion at that time, decided that research institutions in the country should not be in the government, should be completely outside the government system. And I think that was something that we should all be grateful to him for about. And his logic was very interesting. His logic was that research institutions should not be in the government because they are going to provide you the safeguards of governance. And if you do not set them outside the government system, then they will not have the wherewithal and the ability and probably the independence of making those observations on policy making, observations that impact policy making and the evaluation as well. So when I read this report, Professor Mahalanobis' words rang in my ears, and I said that it is not that the raw data is not made available by the government. But what was missing, in my view, and it was a long gap, the last report of this nature came in 2016, was the analysis of the data by an independent organization which takes the effort to analyze what it means and what it does not mean and what kind of policy prescription you have. So that, to my mind, is something that ISD needs to be complimented for, and ILO needs to be again also complimented for associating itself with this initiative. And ISD, in my view, has done met a kind of a gap that existed, because even people in the media like us, we do read reports, but we do need to be aided and assisted with such analysis. So I think that's the first point I would like to make. And therefore, my question is to IHD is that why was there such a long gap between 2016 and 2024? And I was very happy to hear from Professor Sharma that there would be a regular a kind of a frequency, or maybe the next report will come in 2025. I think everybody will be waiting for such a report. Dr. Anantha Nageshwaran referred to the fact that government intervention needs to be defined properly on the basis of such reports and in the employment and employment area. I entirely agree with him, but I would submit that it is such reports which actually help in government drawing the right lessons in policy making as well. So therefore, government's role is not just creating jobs, but the government's role is also to use such reports to evaluate its own policy efficacy and policy effectiveness over a period of time. So therefore, let us not narrowly define the government's role in just creating jobs based on such a report, but also in making the necessary policy corrections, if any, based on such reports. I would also say that there is also tremendous scope based on this report, with collaboration with different universities and academic institutions. Of course, there's a point has been made, and I would say that the corporate involvement is very, very important. There are many suggestions that have been made in this report, which clearly underline the need for greater interaction and involvement with the corporate sector. Because the relevance of this report is as strong for the corporate sector as for any other segment of the economy. I mean, for example, the issue about returns on education is something that I think it will be a great lesson for the Indian corporate sector in deciding on what they need to do with their hiring or employment strategies. So my suggestion to IHD would be to make it a regular annual event in the sense that annual report. And the Indian media, I would say, will be grateful to IHD for making it an annual product. Let me now just briefly touch upon 3 issues that struck me in this report, which I don't think it's been highlighted by the presenters here earlier, but it needs probably greater understanding. As was rightly pointed out, the self-employed category is the largest segment in the Indian employment scene, and I'm just wondering that what does this mean for the various policies that operate in this space? Is there a social security angle that needs to be looked at, and from, because this is a large segment, and can there be better systems available for, if the reality is this, self-employed is the largest segment of the employed category, then why not make sure that those self-employed categories are actually taken care of in many ways that they are right now not taken care of? That's number one. Number two, there is a constant refrain in this report about how you need to shift employment out of agriculture into the non-farm sector, and that has been the trend. But what the policy needs to be with regard to agriculture itself, making agricultural employment a little more productive, and how do you make sure that agriculture can that be reimagined in a way that the employment, whichever employment is there, that employment becomes a little more productive, as well as it enhances value addition in a different way with technology. Now, whenever you're talking about educating the educated people, we are all thinking of the non-agricultural, non-farm sector. But probably, given the kind of experience that you've seen in some segments of agricultural and food processing sector and value add, now why not look at agriculture as a job provider and as a reimagined category? That's number two. And finally, what I would say is that this report on the youth unemployment, in my view, is a cause for alarm, because if you have a data like where the educated youth in the share of unemployed category has gone up over the period of 20 years from 35% to 66%, we are probably sitting on a kind of a time bomb, because if we do not find proper employment for them or some sort of a method by which this energy is tapped creatively, productively, then I think it will be a disservice to this report also if we don't take necessary steps. So I'm sure, as Dr. Nageswaran said, that this is a report that will get due recognition and understanding from the government and evaluation. But I think in civil society also, in the media also, the finding of this report should do reflection and due attention and should get properly evaluated and discussed. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ashok, for highlighting the importance of self-employment, of employment in the agriculture sector and of youth employment. In addition to stressing the importance of reaching out, not only to those who are engaged in research or government, but also to industry, to civil society, to media. Thank you. I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists for their brevity. Everybody, we've taken less than 30 minutes for 3 presentations. What I would like to do is to invite, say, 8 questions, okay? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry. So let me take one question from each of these blocks, and then I'll come back. Yes, but I would request you to formulate a question, not a comment.
I'm Akash Bhattacharya from All India Central Council of Trade Unions. My question is, what role are the new labor codes likely to play in affecting the issues that have been highlighted in this report, particularly the conditions of jobs, and the rights of youth to make certain demands with regard to their jobs and quality of jobs? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone from this block? No? Let me go. I've seen you, sir. I'll come back to you. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, but Chief Economic Advisor, in fact, said that, that entire increase in self-employed category should not be, and particularly within the women, should not be interpreted purely as under distress or something. I just want, on this comment, I just want to know the reaction of the team, the team leader.
Okay. Yes. No, just hang on. I'll come back to you. Yeah.
You're seeing the post-financial crisis 2007, and even after this post-COVID, most of the European economies, US economies are seeing overheated and the unemployment rate is quite low. But that is not the trend we see in India. It's a lot more informal migration and it's a lot more concentrated in few cities only. And the unemployment rate is still very high, So why is it that capacity building and all that, the startup policies are not functioning that effectively?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm Pratap from Sociology Department, University of Delhi. So just I would like to know if the report at all covered the youth who are disabled. Disability, did it cover disability? Thank you.
Thank you. We've had 4 questions. No, I'll go in the order I saw the hands. No, not you, sir. That person there and the lady here. Yeah. Go ahead. Yep.
Hello, sir. I am Balakrishna from BITS Pilani. So I have a question related to this gig and platform economy workers. As most of the youth involved in this kind of sectors nowadays And what are the reflections of this gig and platform economy workers for this report? Because from the NSS also, as you know, it's very difficult to collect this kind of information. Or is there any possibility to include those kind of information later on in the NSSO?
Yep.
Okay, I'm Dr. Pooja Mishra. I'm from Birla Institute of Management Technology. So like Dr. Nageshwaran mentioned that the migration that has happened effectively should not be interpreted as distress for female labor force participation in agriculture. I know there's another report which goes back and talks about it, where they've said that the male population is moving to cities, and that's where the female is. That's the reason why females are moving into the villages, which is fantastic. At least females are getting employed. But instead of going back and patting ourselves on the back, should we not try to move those females also to more productive employment opportunities? Is my take on that.
Yes.
I'm from the skilling sector.
Stand up and speak more clearly. Yep.
I'm from the skilling sector. I heard Professor Srivastava about the fact that we are not seeing, we're seeing overqualified people, graduates, and working for underqualified jobs, where their jobs are not as per their qualifications. So how does it correlate with the RTE? And what do you see the trend going forward? As in, are people or are people stepping out of school wanting to invest in higher education, graduation, technical graduation, which is becoming expensive by the day?
Okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'm retired from Ministry of Industry. I would just like to check one aspect as to what is the total employment that is coming into the field, and out of that, how much is going to the youth employment? That is one. Secondly, if we are employing youth instead of employing a more experienced person by industry, then is there any comparison of salary levels as to why should some industry employ a youth rather than an experienced person? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who has an irresistible urge to ask a question? If not, I will turn to the panelists. And if there's time, I would be happy to take more questions. Yes, all right. No, you need to be audible to everybody, not just the table here.
So this is about the 13.2 slide of the presentation. I was just seeking a clarification in terms of, it says that from 47% self-employed people, there was this marginal increase in the employer and lot of increase in unpaid family. I'm just wondering, is it all the women who are because because it said that unpaid family workers was largely women who migrated. So is it largely the movement of women workers? So if they were self-employed, but there is an increase, so if they were productively or economically also in a better position in terms of before 2019, what were they doing and from where have they migrated to this unpaid category? I also thought that on the report, you have mentioned MSMEs, but so MSMEs have a large chunk of employment. In fact, if the data goes, they actually employ the second largest employers after agriculture. That's how the enterprise survey pitches them. But in terms of giving good employment, MSMEs have a lot of limitations. So have you, worked on those side of limitations also? Maybe the report would tell me more. Thank you.
Thank you. What I would like to do now is perhaps turn to the panelists first, if they have any question they wish to address, after which I'll turn to the team leaders. Okay, so shall we begin with you, Ravi? Did you express a desire to speak?
No, Alak can begin. If you want the presenters to begin or the panelists?
Well, we could do it either way. We can begin with the presenters. So fine. Why don't we begin with the presenters and Alak and Ravi and share in that order? Please select the question you wish to address. It will not be possible to answer every question.
I pick up 2-3 questions. Labor code. Yeah. Labor code Ravi works a lot, so he will address. We have not gone into so much detail. Disability question, unfortunately, we have not gone into. It is an important issue to reply. About self-employment, this is, and again, Chief Economic Advisor also pointed out, and as has been pointed out by several other articles, several other researchers, I think this increase of 6% self-employment, which has come largely from unpaid family labor. Unpaid family labor is mainly accounted by women. And by the way, when you do the analysis, wages, incomes, poverty levels and all that, best employment in India is regular employment, followed by self-employment and then casual employment. Self-employment is a very heterogeneous category. It consists of very good employment, also consists of all vendors which you see, supply driven, all that, vegetable sellers, all are. So I think I won't pass judgment, but self-employment, growth in self-employment, and I think it's right, India has probably one of the largest self-employment category in the world. So rise in unpaid, otherwise, if women go out of work and start doing anything, that is a positive trend. But definitely the quality of employment, agriculture, by the way, the rate of agricultural employment, growth of agricultural employment is so high, something like 7-8% during COVID period, after COVID period. So I think it shows the quality of employment is bad and maybe not as much remunerative as it should be. And this also about feminization of agriculture was taking place earlier also, but whether it's a healthy trend, yeah.
There is a 5% growth in self-employment, but the own account worker has declined. So there is a very marginal increase in individual employer, and the unpaid family worker has increased by close to 7%. So I'm wondering who are those, own account workers who are employing their own family member women into their jobs. Otherwise, this number is not
Right.
competitive.
What, as I said, this women who are unpaid family workers, they are mainly women. Self-employment category, own account category, maybe largely males. And employer category has also increased marginally by roughly 1%. So this is a very different kind of trends. So Ravi and Sher.
Thanks. I think the number of questions relating to female employment, the growth of unpaid, family or helpers in the rural areas, there is a dilemma here because whatever explanation we have should be consistent both with the decline of female employment in agriculture between 2000 and 2018-19, and then the subsequent increase. And I think we have pointed out the fact what the composition of this increase has been, that it has been mainly in less remunerative work, whether as helpers or as own account workers. But I don't think we have a fully worked out explanation for why this has been the case. Partly we attribute it to the pandemic, but the fact of the matter is that these changes started occurring before the pandemic. You see this trend change from 2018-19 itself. So it is something which still begs an explanation, and we don't have a full explanation in the report itself. 2 or 3 other questions. One is the role of labor codes. We have pointed out in the report, in both in the policy missions, we pointed out the need for comprehensive regulation of labor, of social protection, And this of course is at the moment being provided with through the instrumentality of codes. We have not gone into the industrial relations aspect, which I think you partly mentioned when you talked about, how will youth voice their voice their concerns and so on and so forth. But this is something can be concerned. Now the question, gig and platform workers, we have pointed out both. We pointed out in the reports what are the implications of gig and platform work. We have also pointed out in the report that there's need for better data in order to capture gig and platform work. So this has been sufficiently well covered, and in the more detailed report, you will find a rendering of this. On the overqualification issue, this is an area of great concern. First of all, there are two ends of the employment spectrum which we have constantly focused on. One is the low skill end, and then there is the high skill end. And we believe, there is a lack of demand. Mr. Hassan pointed out at both ends. So basically, there is a broad issue of lack of demand for jobs. That is this thing. But at the higher end, it is becoming a very serious issue. Again, as was pointed out, it is becoming a more serious issue because the proportion of youth who are now secondary and above educated or graduate and above qualification going up, and many of them are working in very low qualified jobs. So this is really a problem taken with the overall problem of rising employment and the waiting time for them to get absorbed in the labor market.
Thank you, Ravi. Chair?
I'll be quick since most of the questions have been addressed, but let me just flag then 3 points, and they also come from the panelists. I mean, firstly, indeed, there is a lot of regional variation. I think it is also stressed in the report, and I think it's very important to look at that variation in terms of the policy recommendations, because clearly, there is no one size fits all that is going to be appropriate given the variation across the different regions. Second point is the role of the private sector, and I think, I would stress that the report does highlight that role as well. I think it is recognized very much that we need, as Dr. Sanghi pointed out, a demand-driven skills ecosystem. And I can only reiterate that the report does tackle this, but I think it's very important suggestion to engage in further dialogue with the private sector, of course, from the ILO as a tripartite agency. We very much promote that, and we're very happy to see trade unions speaking today, and hopefully some of the employer organizations are represented. Third, final point is this whole issue. I'm not going to go into this issue about women's employment in agriculture, but just to stress that if you to look at the longer term, I mean, clearly the major challenge is, of course, not only addressing what's happening in agriculture in terms of productivity, but what's happening in non-farm employment and what are the opportunities for women to get those types of decent and productive employment, which tends to pay more, of course, on average, have better conditions in other sectors. I mean, that has to be the issue, right? I think sometimes you can go down a rabbit hole on some of these issues and not emerge, but the real challenge is how to get jobs created, as Rana also pointed out, in those smaller towns, in those places where women can access employment in the non-farm sector. I think that remains a longer-term goal that needs to be looked at as well.
Thank you. Would the panelists like to say something? Rana?
Just a point that maybe this is something more for next time's report, but I was just thinking that, the issue of labor regulations and social protection, they sort of go together, and too often the debate does not bring them together. My own feeling is that, pushing a lot of social protection kind of functions onto firms is probably not a good idea. It doesn't work. And so we need to strengthen our public social protection systems to take care of those. And I know ILO has done a lot of work on this. So, it's just a thought for maybe the next report with IHD.
Thank you, Rana. Sunita?
Yes. Sir, only the issue of the overqualified graduates, I think in the skill ecosystem, so far we have been very supply driven. There was no distinction that has been made when we draft the policies, whether it's a skill gap, is skill mismatch, a skill shortage. So whatever training that we are giving, irrespective of gender, spatial, whatever, it's a generic kind of a training that we are giving. We don't realize that whether there is a specific shortage of a particular kind of a skill, or is there's a mismatch between a skill of somebody and what is required, and is there a complete If we are able to skill, looking into these three aspects and distinguish clearly what is the difference between skill mismatch, skill shortage, and skill gap. I think some of these issues which are arising today in terms of overqualification, people having a job with more than, less than their qualification, those issues can be addressed, sir.
No, I just wanted to just endorse the point that was raised by one of the questioners on including the disabled population in the study. If the population of disabled in this country is around 10%, so I think is very vitally necessary that you need to have a study of this nature, must include their component, their issues, how they impacted. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, the team leaders. Thank you, the panelists. And maybe we'll finish earlier than I had thought we would. Yeah. Well, not quite ahead of the schedule. We were meant to finish at 1:15. But it gives me the luxury of taking 5 minutes of your time to conclude. I want to begin with the big picture. If we think of India in the 21st century, it is as clear as daylight that the employment elasticity of output in the agricultural sector is zero. In some sense, what we are seeing between 2019 and 2022 is probably a consequence of the pandemic. As migrant workers return home, you got an expansion of output in the agricultural sector because there was no employment possibilities elsewhere. In manufacturing, in services with lockdowns. So I'm not sure whether this trend will continue. So first, the possibilities of creating employment in the agricultural sector are close to negligible across states, almost, the evidence suggests. Second, the employment that is being created is, if we take the 20-year perspective that the report has taken, is being created largely in construction or in sort of low-skill services where barriers to entry are low, skill levels are low, technology levels are low, and the quality of employment is poor. To me, the only way forward for India's to find a solution for India's employment problem is for us to create employment possibilities in manufacturing. Because, 30 years ago, the share of manufacturing in output and employment was about 4 to 5 percentage points higher than it is now. So what we have done in a period where not just China, but Indonesia, Thailand, a large number of countries have industrialized, we have deindustrialized. And I think Rana made this point that we need to pay more attention to manufacturing. And there is one other thing, if you look at this pattern of evolution of employment, it is quite clear that there is a trade-off between quantity and quality. Employment is being created in construction and in low-skilled services where the quality of employment is very poor. But employment is not being created in manufacturing, where the quality of employment may not be perfect, but it is distinctly better. What is more, manufacturing is the only one among these sectors. No one is going to move from working in a dhaba to an IT firm, or for a gig worker to move to financial services. But in the manufacturing sector, people who start work on the shop floor can actually get to be managers. Productivity levels rise. So I think there is perhaps need for a focus on manufacturing. Now, there are two things I want to say, not as Deepak, but I want to say this as someone who has got to know the Institute of Human Development. Ashok, I think I value your suggestion that the reports should be more regular than they have been. But I want you and everybody else here to recognize that while we did reports in 2014 and 2016, we had no opportunity to do it because there were no data available until 2018-19.
I was hitting it.
Right. And then when the data became available, the pandemic struck. So, this is about and the lead time in doing such a big report is a couple of years. So in an ideal world, we should do this report every 2 years. Yeah, because remember, we need a database. But the Institute for Human Development, we pack a big punch for a small size. Our human resources, our financial resources are limited. But if the ILO, Mr. Sasaki has left, they have supported this report. If they continue to support such a report, I'm sure that the Institute of Human Development would do its best to produce it biannually, every 2 years. The second is a suggestion I have that, Rana made the point that, India is a big country. There are enormous variations between states and between regions. If you look at manufacturing value added in automobiles, 50% in the automobile sector, 50% is in Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. That's where employment is being created. Not just in the automobile sector, but in information technology, in textiles, in clothing, so on. So could we be catalysts as IHD for state employment reports? In other words, if we could create an analytical framework and kind of mentor a state institution to do a state employment report for Tamil Nadu, employment report for Rajasthan, it might be a very good spin-off. But all these things are easier said than done. In conclusion, let me say it's been rich fare this morning, and all of us owe a debt of gratitude to those who wrote this India Employment Report, because I think we have barely touched the surface. People, it is a treasure in terms of the evidence it provides, in terms of the analysis it does. And while it's easy to say that there's not enough prescription, we should not be disheartened, because almost no one has a clear prescription of what needs to be done. So I'd like to compliment the authors, the team, the IHT, for having done such a splendid job. And I'm sure this report will be read for years to come, as the first two were, the 2014 and 2016, because they are a real source of evidence, of analysis. So thank you all, particularly Professor Sharma, Professor Srivastava, and Dr. Vedic, but the entire IHT team.
Just to add one point, can we not get an industry body also to partner up with them? Because
Thank you for the suggestion, but may I suggest that we bring this to a close? Why don't you give the suggestions to the Institute of Human Development and the team leaders? Yeah.
Yes, this does bring us to the end of this very engaging, very enriching discussion and deliberation. Congratulations to the report team and the team IHT team that is sitting here. A big round of applause to all of them. This is indeed a very good policy document that IHT has brought out in its silver jubilee year of celebration. Definitely a milestone. And this is a photograph moment. I invite the team again to join the people on the dais. Please, the report team. And meanwhile, I would just like to announce that now the report has been launched in the online also. All of you are interested in reading the report. It is up on the IHD and the ILO websites. So I would like to thank all of you for taking time out for joining us in these deliberations. And also just a quick thank you to the IHD team that coordinated the communications and administration, to everyone who participated in the preparation of this. Thank you to the technical team, thank you to IIC, and thank you to Professor Sharma for everything. Now lunch is waiting. I request all of you to please join us for lunch.
Well, everybody is leaving, so you better get the group together fast.